This is the Get Savvy Show, brought to you by the Reluctant Leader Academy. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and on each episode, I'm going to help you get savvy to allow you and your business to grow. We'll be focusing on the three elements that lead to business success: your mindset, your processes, and your skills. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Get Savvy Show by the Reluctant Leader Academy. I'm your host today, Mark Terrell, and welcome, Adrian. Good to have you along today. So this show is all about making a difference. I have Roger Fairhead, who is going to tell us about why making a difference is so important to him and why he works with his clients on that basis as well. So I think without further ado, I'll bring on Roger to join us. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Roger, tell us a bit about yourself before we get stuck into the main bit of the show.
Sure. Well, I'm a speaker, author, coach, and trainer on leadership, and I run a thing called Prize-Winning Leadership. It's based on the book that was published a few years ago, and it's the model I use to help leaders understand what leadership's all about and how to become better leaders to improve their leadership skills. Towards the end of last year, I was invited to join the Global Leadership Network as their chief executive. So I have two roles as chief exec of the Global Leadership Network UK and Ireland, and running Prize-Winning Leadership.
Awesome. You're a busy chap, so we're very lucky to have you here today, Roger. And so we better get on with the show. Waste no time. So the next part of the show, as regular viewers will know, is that we dive into my guests' motivators. So you'll see on the screen that Roger's main motivation is the searcher motivator at the top there, so making a difference. So funnily enough, that's what we're talking about today. The middle one there, the expert, so being a specialist in what he does is drives him, and also being creative and innovative is also an important drive. So Roger, where do you see, or how do you see these motivations being fulfilled in what you do?
It's interesting, isn't it? For many years, as a leader, as somebody interested in leading people and in leadership, I've often felt that I don't really feel that I want to lead, and I don't want to be the boss, which sometimes seems a little odd. But when I took the first motivational map, you and I met some years ago, and I took my first motivational map assessment, and I discovered these three came out at the top. I understood why, because director of my motivations is quite low. I don't actually want to be the boss, but I do want to make a difference. Now, the strapline I've introduced into my business is helping difference makers make a difference. And I've found that most of the clients I end up working with, that I have the best chemistry with, that I have the best engagement with, have a similar mindset. They want to make a difference. There's something in their world that they want to see changed and be different as a result of the things that they've brought into the space. The expert and creator come along with that. The expert, I like to know that I know that I know that I know what I'm talking about or what I'm working with. So I dig into things really quite deeply, and often with the people I'm working with would love to have the time and opportunity to do that. But actually sometimes it's just helpful for somebody else to point them in the right direction on some of these things. And then the creator, I just love making new space, finding new ways, new expressions of doing things. Hence, really constructing the leadership model that I use is drawn from things that you and I would both recognize all around us, but it's put into a model that is then easy to figure out, to understand, and to know where to go next.
That's really interesting. And it'd be no surprise to know that actually we share the top three. Our top three motivations are the same, slightly different order. My creators at the top and searchers third, but very much in line with the way we think, and obviously that's why we get on. And I think it's worth bearing that in mind. If you think about people at work and how people get on, we talk a lot about personalities, but I think in my experience, the biggest where we fall out is when we are not aligned. And I think motivations have a lot to do with that, because they are very sort of closely aligned with our values. And we tend to fall out about values quite quickly, whereas personalities probably take a time. But is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, now there's some really interesting thoughts in there, Mark. One of the things I found most useful in motivational maps, in DISC, in emotional intelligence, and a number of the assessment tools I use, is that sometimes it's interesting to know more about me, to help me understand me, but that's not what it's all about. One of the most useful things that we can learn from doing motivational maps and some of these other things is to learn a language, a common language that you can use to understand and interpret other people. It's rather like when I was growing up, I used to watch a program. You probably saw the same one. It was Play School. And you'd look through the round window today, and next day you'd look through the square window. And it's almost as if you were looking at the same situation from an entirely different perspective. And it can, sometimes we feel as if, well, everybody should see my perspective. That's the obvious one. That's the right one. And yet when you start to realize that other people have a different perspective on life, a different way of interpreting the things around them, then you can understand them. And often that is enough to be able to get over some of these interpersonal conflicts that come up. Why would you do that? You can see why they do that because you can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Just share something that Adrian's put in actually, which is interesting. So I don't think we can see that because he's hidden behind something else. What he said is, interestingly, I do not wish to be a boss, but I do make a difference as a chairperson. Which, yeah, I can relate to that. I think you probably as well, Roger, with regards to making a difference in that position.
Well, absolutely. One of the interesting parts of my journey over the last 18 months is that a few years ago, I was invited to join the board of a group in the UK, a company in the UK called the Global Leadership Network UK, which is part of an international organization, mainly based out of Chicago in the States. I was invited to join the board of directors to help as I think was Adrian was saying that you as chair of the board. I was invited to join the board and then to become chair. So I was thoroughly enjoying being involved in this organization because our values were so aligned, our activities and desires were so aligned. There was a chemistry that was going on, there was a culture that was going on that was all aligned, and we could see that. And then towards the end of last year in November, I was approached to see if I would step down from the board in order to take on a position as chief executive of the organization, which I'm glad to say went through very smoothly. We're just putting the processes in place for that. But the alignment in there is so important that we've, and in fact, what we part of the prize-winning leadership model looks at two key things in terms of recruitment and in terms of staffing. We look at values and we look at virtues. The values are things like culture, character, and chemistry. They're the things that are kind of inside of what goes on. And then there's on the other side, the virtues are to do with competence. So if we can be aligned in our culture, our character, and our chemistry, in other words, we want to make the same difference in life. We want to pursue the same outcomes in what we do. Then if we're all driven in that direction, we're all aligned in that direction, well, that gets us a great start. It doesn't get us to the finish line, though, because you need the competence to go with it. And in that regard, we need to be figuring out what are the strengths of each member of staff, each volunteer, everybody involved in the activity, in order to make sure they're on the right seat in the bus. Jim Collins, you may recall, in Good to Great, talked about getting the right people on the bus and get them on the right seat on the bus. So your values and your virtues and motivation runs right the way through all of those, which is fascinating to see the link between the motivators, the motivational mapping, and how the character, competence, and chemistry on the one hand, and the competence on the other.
It's fascinating stuff. So we'll just move on from that. We'll stop sharing your motivators. I think we can talk about that all day if we had the chance. But so we're here today to get savvy about making a difference. And it seems quite obvious why that would be so important to you, because obviously it's your top motivator. But how does that sort of pan out with regards to the way you may be leading in your role with your new chief executive role, and maybe also with regards to your prize-winning leadership?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the strapline I use is helping difference makers make a difference. And whenever I work with a new client, whenever I start a new client engagement, I usually ask two key questions. What's the difference you want to make? And what makes you different? Now, those two things are really, really important to get an understanding of. If you can get an understanding of what the difference you want to make and what makes you different, the first question, interestingly, often many people can say, well, this is the difference I want to make. They sometimes struggle more with what makes you different. And that's all about niching. It's all about understanding your audience and understanding where you have your best connection with your audience. And we're just going through the process in the GLN of the same process that I've taken many customers through before, of putting together a business plan that takes those questions and then expands them into looking at our why statement. We refer to a prize, the why statement, a prize. What's the prize that you would have in the future? So this is looking beyond the horizon. What's out there? What are you aiming for? What are you seeking to achieve? And I define a prize as an inspiring image of the future that produces passion in people and turns have to into want to. An inspiring image of the future that produces passion in people and turns have to into want to. Such an important underlying piece to understand the difference you make. And then looking at our vision and our mission. Our vision I describe as being, what can you see with your eyes closed? When you look beyond the horizon, what can you see with your eyes closed? And that's where you're headed. And the mission is, what can you see with your eyes open? That's how are you going to get there? And if you can articulate those two things, then you're going a long way towards understanding how you're going to put it, how you're going to make the difference that you want to achieve.
I think it's worth just talking about the rewards for the motivators as well, because one of the key rewards for the making a difference motivator is that feedback. It's getting feedback from others. Feeling you're making a difference is so important, isn't it? So how do you go about fulfilling that for yourself with regards to feeling you're making a difference, and how do you work with your clients when that comes up as a strong motivator?
Well, what I like to talk about is making a measurable change. Now, I grew up as a project manager. Well, I started my career as a project manager in managing engineering projects. And one of the key things that we were taught right at the beginning of my time as a project manager is, if you can't measure it, you can't make it. If you can't count how many of them there are, if you can't measure the size of it, if you can't articulate how to measure whether you've achieved it or not, you can't deliver it. So in terms of making a measurable difference, what are you going to use to measure that difference? Now, in some organizations, it's very easy. It's largely in pound notes terms, but it's becoming challenged by the corporate social responsibility world, the CSR, the idea of the triple bottom line of pursuing people and planet as well as profit as measurable outcomes. And that becomes more difficult. You can't just measure the pound notes. You have to be able to find ways to measure your impact on society and your impact on the ecology, on the world. And finding those ways, there are all sorts of studies that are helping us to do that. There are other factors that talk about, take the triple bottom line, add a fourth to become a quadruple bottom line, to add a purpose. What's the purpose that you want to pursue, as well as the people, profit and planet? And you'll notice the alliteration going on here. I like to define a difference maker who's passionate about their purpose. They're working on the people and the planet as well as the profit, but they also have one eye on philanthropy, on doing something that's more altruistic. And then if we can put something in place to measure all of those, for me as a difference maker, that's where the difference happens. And one of the most valuable pieces of feedback I had recently was from one of my customers. They turn over something like 5 million in annual in UK terms, and I was speaking to the chief executive there. He said, "You've got an open book for this next year. The board can see the difference that working with you is making on our organisation." And that to me was the most valuable piece of feedback I've had in years.
And you know what, Roger, that is such a great lesson in the leadership terms. I tell my clients, the one skill you want to work on most is how to give good quality feedback. And not only give good quality feedback, give it plentiful, and make sure you catch people doing things right more often you catch people doing things wrong, because there's a place to it's important to do both. You can't focus one without the other. And I think a lot of people in leadership forget the importance of catching people doing things right, probably 3 or 4 times more often than when you catch people doing things wrong. And when I say catching people doing things wrong, really what we're talking about is just bringing them back on track. They might have just gone off track a bit, as opposed to being wrong. But it's you don't want to be the person that is that just catching people doing things wrong. That's really not where you want to be, is it?
Well, absolutely. Some years ago, I started cycling a lot. I started commuting to work on a bicycle. And one of the very first lessons that I was taught, which was so helpful to me in the daily commute through the roads around where I live, and that is if as you're cycling along and you notice a pothole, don't look at the pothole. Look at where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. Focus on where you want to be, not where you don't want to be. And so what you find is if you look at the pothole, you end up riding through it, and that gives you burst tires and all sorts. If you can focus on the strengths, now the Marcus Buckingham wrote the Strengths Finder some years ago with Gallup, and there've been other similar studies about strengths. And what they would tell us is that if you can identify people's strengths and work on those, well, if you work on their weaknesses, identify their weaknesses, and this is where most appraisals seem to find themselves focusing. In your appraisal, you focus on the things that the person's weaknesses. If you focus on your weaknesses and strengthen those, the best you'll ever be is average. But if you can focus on people's strengths, then you can be excellent. And so in terms of the virtues and values that we talked about earlier, if we can find those competencies that people enjoy, those competencies that make people want to do the job, it's if you're working on those competencies that are your strength, your weaknesses, then okay, today's another work day, I'll have to get on with it, won't I? But if you can find those competencies that match with their strengths, then they're going to be wanting to get out of bed. If you can turn have to into want to, then you're going to get so much more out of the same people. We get the outputs and outcomes with the same input. The outputs and outcomes are going to be so much higher.
Absolutely. If you can dial into what gets somebody out of bed in the morning, then you're onto a winner there, and obviously feed that motivator. That's what we say when we're using maps, isn't it? Exactly. So going back to that, you mentioned the vision mission piece, which is really interesting, and I've written down 3 things actually with regards to that. We've sort of talked about the why here with regards to motivation, but there's also the other elements of the what and the how. So how do you sort of look at those 3 elements with regards to your when you're working with clients or in your role with regards to those 3 elements?
I tend to think of the first thing, having identified the why, having identified the difference we want to make. I tend to work back from the difference we want to make, look at the outcomes that are going to make that difference, look at the outputs that will make those outcomes happen, and then look at the inputs that'll make the outputs happen. So you've got the inputs that make the outputs happen. Outputs are things like the input might be turn up the thermostat, the output might be the central heating boiler comes on, and the outcome is that the house is warmer. That then gives you the difference you want to make is to have a pleasant working and living environment. As a very simple example, that's kind of what we work on. We work on what's the difference you want to make. What are the outcomes, which are the long-term results you want to see happening that will cause that difference? Work back to the outputs and then work back to the activities, and then obviously the resources that you'll need to put those into place.
Absolutely. Now, Adrian's made a great point. Hopefully this will come up on, we'll be able to see it this time we can. So one issue is I see it unless this change comes from the top down, it doesn't really work. Absolutely spot on, Adrian. I think more businesses are moving towards the bottom-up scenario. You see the big, like Google and those big tech organisations. If you see how they work, they start with the why, and also they're dialed into that bottom-up. What do the teams want? What do they need first so they can operate at their best? And so that trickles up to the senior management team as opposed to everything's trickling down. So would you agree with that, Roger? Is that what your sort of philosophy?
I think there's a bit of both, and you're absolutely right, Adrian. That if it needs to be right at the top. It needs to be there needs to be buy-in right at the top of the organisation. If it's another of those programs, well, yes, it seems like we should do one of these programs. Let's do this program or that program, and there's no real buy-in. Then it's just another of those whims that management come out with every now and again. But if there's absolute buy-in from the organisation at the top, let me give you an example that I've been thinking about in recent weeks and months. And, at this time, there's all sorts of examples people are throwing around about business models. And one business model I'd like us just to think about. Now, I'm going to overplay this just to illustrate a point. But do you remember Blockbuster, the organization that was famous for
I'll have a pee, Bob. Yeah. Got it.
The people famous for turning down the purchase of Netflix, which is quite interesting. But the interesting thing about Blockbuster is that they made most of their money on late returns. So if you were to ask them, what's your business model? And I'm playing this to the extreme, really. What's your business model? Then they could have said, our business model is encouraging our viewers to return their videos late. Now, a good example of a why there would be to say we're an entertainment organization. We want to entertain people, help them to relax, help them to enjoy themselves. No, their business model appears to be, I wasn't involved, appears to be encouraging people to return their videos late. Contrast that with a company called Zappos, which was bought by Amazon some years ago. Zappos was run by a guy called Tony Say, and he sadly died at the end of last year. But he had a number of things that were absolutely remarkable in the story of the organization. And the first one was that at the end of an induction month, at the end of the first month of having been recruited to the organization, every employee was given an envelope. And in the envelope was $1,000. And they were told, take that money, clear off, and you'll never work for us again. The people that stayed are those who wanted to stay more than they wanted to take the $1,000 and go. Now, I think that's a fascinating. The first 2 weeks of what you did there was spending time in the customer service desk. The business Zappos was all about shoes. Buy shoes online. So what idiot would think of trying to sell shoes online? Of course, you want to try them on, walk up and down, look at them in the mirror, see what somebody else thinks about them. Well, no, 20 years ago, he started, roughly 20 years ago, started the idea of online purchasing of shoes. And actually, he said on one occasion, actually, I'm not that bothered about shoes, but I'm absolutely passionate about customer service. And you could see that. There's a famous example of a best man who was due to be on attending a wedding the next day. And he phoned Zappos up and said, my shoes haven't arrived. What am I going to do? So what the customer service representative did was they overnighted a pair of shoes, the same pair of shoes, to his address, double-checked all the details, sent them overnight to his address so they arrived in the morning, and then said, we're going to refund the cost and we're going to add you to our VIP membership group for free. Now, what they found was their customers kept coming back. They had excellent customer service. They had a why that was worth working for.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talked about the Blockbuster because I don't know whether you know, but my father had a video rental business, and one of his the ways he competed with Blockbuster was that he didn't have those late return fees. So,
interesting.
It makes it easy to compete against, doesn't it? So if you've got that sort of extra charge, then you can say, well, no late fees. Then straight away you're in an advantage. So really interesting. And you share some great stories today, Roger. But sadly, time is getting the better of us, and we need to think about wrapping things up. So before you leave us. Where can people connect with you? So where's the best place to catch you?
Well, to catch me, the best places are going to be email is probably easiest. If you go to roger@rogerfairhead.com, that's roger@rogerfairhead.com is my email address. Feel free to email me. If you go to my website at rogerfairhead.com, then there's a little link at the top where you can send an email or you can book a call. And I'd love to connect with you and talk about these things some more.
Yeah, do that, absolutely. And we talked about motivational maps. We both use them, so contact either one of us and we can help you with that. It's obviously something that we're passionate about because it's a really good place to start with helping people with all sorts of things, coaching, leadership, and all the other things that we can help make a difference even. Fancy
Indeed.
that. Great, thank you, Roger. I will catch you very shortly, and thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. It's great sharing time with you, Mark. And take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Great. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Roger was a great guest. He knows his stuff, and don't hesitate to get in touch with Roger if you want to have a chat with him. He's very generous with his time. So I just want to share with you what's something that's happening with regards to the Reluctant Leader Academy. The Get Savvy Club is now open for anyone to become a member. Why would you want to become a member? Well, the whole ethos around the club is helping you to create more success within your life, your business, or your career. There is plenty of courses to get stuck into with support from me, and check that out. So you'll see the link below me, and also I'll put the link in the comments if that's something you want to check out. So that's today's episode of the Get Savvy Show. I look forward to the next episode. Thank you for those that have joined us. And if you find this in your feed on social media, feel free to comment. If you hear anything that's interesting and you want us to comment on, leave a comment and we'll get back to you, either myself or Roger. So until the next episode of the Get Savvy Show, bye for now.